Anti-globalism is going mainstream, which means engineered disaster is about to strike. And this is by Brandon Smith via Alt Markets US on Zero Hedge. He says, I've noted in the past that criminals tend to brag about their criminality when they believe there's nothing anyone can do about it. Frankly, in their narcissism, many of them cannot help but reveal in the moment and let everyone know how superior they are to the rest of us. We witnessed many moments like this from elitists within globalist institutions the past couple of years. At the height of the pandemic pandemonium, there were people like the globalist academics at MIT proclaiming that we are never going to go back to normal, quote unquote, and that we were going to have to accept the loss of many of our freedoms for the rest of our lives in order to combat the spread of anything. There were people like Klaus Schwab declaring the beginning of the Great Reset, quote unquote, and the launch of what the Davos crowd calls the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're talking about transhumanism there. There have also been many political leaders like Joe Biden that strut around on the media stage accusing ideological opponents, conservatives mostly, of being enemies of democracy, quote unquote. If their vision of democracy is medical tyranny and the forced expansion of cultural Marxism, or if their idea of democracy is government cooperation with corporate monopoly and the erasure of our country's founding principles, then yes, I suppose I am indeed the enemy of democracy. He says the globalists were really basking in the glow of their assumed victory. They thought they had us peasants by the scruff of the neck and that their agenda was all but assured. But as I've been arguing since last year, the money elites, may have celebrated a little too early. The agenda of COVID utterly failed if the goal was to implement long-standing mandates and restrictions across North America and Europe. And if you want to know what success for the globalists would have looked like, just examine China with its endless lockdown cycles and digital vaccine passports. The elites wanted that outcome for the West, and they didn't get it. They came close, but millions of Americans, Canadians, and Europeans stood their ground, and the cost to force us into compliance would have been too great. Even Joe Biden has openly admitted that the pandemic is over. They dropped the mandates because they knew if it came to any conflict they would lose. If the goal of the pandemic fear factory was simply to get the population injected with the mRNA vaccines, here they also failed, with many states in the US 40% unvaccinated according to official numbers, and many parts of the world with large unvaxxed populations. There is a massive control group for the COVID vaccines. If there are going to be any constantly developing health problems associated with mRNA vax like myocarditis, then the public is going to know what caused them because of this control group. The globalists needed near 100% vaccination, and they did not get it, not even close. There's no escape from them. They greatly overestimate the public's apathy when it comes to authoritarianism. The rebellion is too large, and they will eventually be held accountable for their trespasses. Case in point, the latest election in Italy has resulted in a landslide win for the Conservative coalition, and the new Prime Minister and first women Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, gave a rousing victory speech this week which directly exposed the far-left invasion of Western nations, globalism, and the poisoning collusion with woke corporations to silence dissent. She called for the return to freedom, and what was the mainstream media's response? They are calling her a fascist. The Italian election is just a small part of an ongoing trend, an awakening of the people to the imminent threats presented by globalists, and the globalists can't stop it. The fear among them is palpable. Anti-globalism is now going mainstream, and as it does, people are going to start looking for answers. Why have our economic conditions been so degraded? And why are we facing stagflationary crisis? Why are prices on everything continuing to climb? Why did we almost lose all of our civil liberties in the name of this virus with a tiny 0.23% official median infection fatality rate? Why are pointless carbon controls being instituted in the middle of a supply chain crisis? And why are politicians and bankers making everything so much worse? The public outcry for a reckoning is growing, and it's the head of globalists that will end up on the chopping block. All roads to destruction lead back to them and the policies they have forced upon the population. Of course, when criminals feel like they're being cornered, they will sometimes set fires and take hostage in the last-ditch effort to stay alive and slip through the net, and I believe we are closing in on that stage of this terrible drama. It's important to accept the conditions of the battlefield as they are, and not underestimate the enemy. The truth is, globalists have extensive means at their disposal to wreak havoc, and they have already set some of these disasters in motion. As I warned many years ago, way back in 2017, in my article, "The Economic Endgame Continues," tensions with Eastern nations are being used to diminish the role of the US dollar as the world reserve currency and the petrocurrency. The conflict is also causing resource shortages and supply chain weaknesses, not to mention an energy crisis in Europe that is now irreversible with the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. I also predicted in 2017 that the Federal Reserve would repeat a pattern of raising interest rates into severe economic weakness, causing increased economic turmoil. They used a very similar tactic on the onset of the Great Depression, which former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke openly admitted was the cause of the long-term deflationary collapse. From my article in 2017, quote, "The changing of the Fed chair is absolutely meaningless as far as policy is concerned. Jerome Powell will continue the same exact initiatives as Yellen. Stimulus will be removed, rates will be hiked, and the balance sheet will be reduced, leaving the massive market bubble the Fed originally created vulnerable to implosion. An observant person might have noticed that central banks around the world seem to be acting in a coordinated fashion to remove stimulus support from markets and raise interest rates, cutting off supply lines of easy money that have long been a crutch for our crippling economy," end quote. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, and the institution that writes global policy initiatives for all other market members called for more rate hikes last week. Aside from the minor interventions by the Bank of England, the evidence shows that the globalists want a crash and are engineering conditions of instability. They set up the dominoes in advance, and now they have decided to knock them down. I think this is a fail-safe, a panic trigger in the event that they did not get the control they wanted from the COVID pandemic. They will blame Russia, they will blame China, they will blame conservatives, they will blame anything and anyone besides themselves in an attempt to divert public attention away from the international banking actions that created the crash conditions in the first place. We can't let them. Whatever happens next, it's vital that people remember who really did this to us and who needs to be punished. Over the course of the next couple of years, the establishment power brokers are going to attempt to use a chaos screen in order to sow seeds of fear in the population. They're going to try to exploit that fear to gain even more centralized governance and change the very foundations of our society while suffocating what's left of our liberties. It's the only play they have left, but at least we now know for certain that there are millions of us out there, millions of people who will not comply and will fight back, and we know that the globalists are afraid. If they weren't, then they would not be falling back to such drastic measures. And this is by Branda Smith via Alt Markets, US on Zero Hedge. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.